Anyways, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, the past few weeks we have been discussing and talking about spiritual disciplines. We've talked about the disciplines of prayer. We've talked about the discipline of meditating on God's Word. We've talked about the discipline of worship. Last week, Pastor Christian, via video, shared an amazing teacher on the spiritual discipline of fasting, which I know some of you are like, you don't say, because all you want to do right now is eat a cheeseburger and scroll through your Instagram feeds just to catch up. But before we get into tonight, I need to frame this idea of spiritual disciplines. And frame this idea of what a discipline is. We do not practice a discipline for the sake of a discipline. We don't fast, we don't give up things that are important or necessary for us just for the sake of making ourselves miserable. Any more than we practice an instrument for the sake of practicing it, where we train for a sport just for the sake of training for it, or study just for the sake of studying. That's not what we do that for. The goal of any discipline is to bring about a freedom in our lives. When we practice and we train and we study, we're doing this to gain the freedom to perform, whether that's on a stage or on a field or on a court. When we fast, we are freeing ourselves from anything that would distract us so that we can focus on God's presence in the moment and be where He's at. That is the point of that. Discipline equals freedom. And the point of that frame is very important. The idea of it is very important for the discipline we're going to discuss tonight, because we have to keep it within this frame. Because, to be honest, this is not my favorite discipline. It's not one that I'm good at. It's not one that I feel qualified to speak on, really. The spiritual discipline I wish to discuss is the spiritual discipline of submission. Wait for it. There we go. Oh, dear. Okay. I knew it was going to show up somewhere in here. It's hard to talk about submission without having to discuss the obvious cloud in the room, which is authority. As humans, we have authority issues. As Americans, we have like a cultural history of clinical grade authority issues. We grow up in a world that is fight the man. That is, this is America. Don't tell me how to live my life. I do what I want to do, right? This is what we grow up in. This is our mindset. And so we have a negative view of authority and we have a negative view of submission. Authority is corrupt. Submission is weak. But this is not the Christian view of authority and submission. It is not the biblical illustration of it. We see a biblical example of what God's idea and purpose of authority is in Exodus, in the Exodus story. This is the story that, if you haven't heard it, it is where God comes in and takes the Israelites that are enslaved in Egypt, leads them through the wilderness to a land that is good, a land that is flowing with milk and honey, a land that is, He has promised to them, the promised land, hence the name. But He does this through a certain way. Now, if you're familiar with the story, there's this guy named Moses that keeps showing up. But Moses is the administrator. Moses is not the person that leads them to the promised land because he doesn't know where it is either. God leads the Israelites to the promised land with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. He leads them with that because no one but Him knows the route on how to get to the promised land. So He sends a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And he doesn't send that just to be a guide. He doesn't send that just to show them the way. He uses a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar by night for a reason. Because the land that they're traveling through is hostile. The place that they're going, the people don't want them there. Nobody likes the Israelites. Anybody would be willing to pick a fight with them if it weren't for one small problem. These people are following an F3 tornado during the day, and they have an F3 fire NATO watching over them at night. Do we really want to pick a fight with that? We don't really know what it is, but I guarantee you if you touch it, it might go 20/20 all over us. It could be bad. God used those things He uses the authority of those to guide and to protect. Our human view of authority is this dark, ominous presence. It's here, it's gloomy. Its goal is to keep us from having fun and to rain on our parade. But that's not what God intends authority to be. To the Christian, authority is meant to be an umbrella, not a rain cloud. The goal of Christian authority is to not flood your day, is to keep you dry. Its hope is to prepare you and to protect you. It wants to help and not harm. That is the Christian perspective on what authority is, the Christian definition of how to look at it. It's the umbrella, not the rain cloud. It understands that discipline equals freedom. So what is the freedom brought to us by the spiritual discipline of submission? Submission frees us from the idea that we have to have it all, the desire that we have to have everything go our way. From having to be in control. Now, most of us be like, I would like to have things go my way. I would like everything to go. I have my plan. I would like everything to go to plan. I would like to remain in control. But the problem happens is we run into eventually something that is beyond our control. We run into a situation that is impossible. And if we're not willing to submit, that's all on us. Everyone may be familiar with the story of the Israelites when they leave Egypt. There's a point where they get trapped between the Egyptian army and this thing called the Red Sea. They're stuck. If they want to maintain control, that means that they have to figure out how to part the Red Sea. They have to figure out how to do something that's impossible, that's beyond their scope of doing, that's beyond their control, no matter how much they want it to be. Submission frees us from that. It allows God the freedom to move in our lives and do the impossible, to make ways where there don't appear to be ways, to bring dead things back to life. When we submit, we allow God the freedom, the room He needs to move in our lives and do things that we can't do. And submission, there's this idea that I'll have to unpack it as I say it. This idea, the definition of spiritual submission. Submission is the death of our expectations, but it is not the death of our dreams. Now, what do I mean by this? Because there's a whole thing. And I'll use the Israelites again since they've been helpful friends so far because they have their own authority issues to help illustrate this. Because they were promised a land that was good. Flowing with milk and honey is the Yieldy phrase. basically meaning that it's perfect. It's got everything they want. It's beautiful. It's plentiful. They have this, and they build this idea in their head that it's going to be peaceful, that it's a place that they can call home, that's a place they belong, where they can grow up and raise families and legacies and all of this stuff. Everything that a human wants is what they're looking at when they get to the promised land. And they get there, and they find out that it is. It's everything they want, except for one thing that was not in their plan. They got there, and they go, yeah, the land is exceedingly good. It's also full of giants. We didn't expect giants. That wasn't in the itinerary. That wasn't in the picture. They were unexpected. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. When we cling to those expectations and they get disappointed, it will kill our dreams. The dreams that I'm talking about, submission isn't asking for those. It's not asking for the God-given desires of your heart. The desires to have friends and have family, to make an impact in the world. That's not what it's asking for. He's not asking for the desire to love and be loved. He's not asking for the desire to belong. Those are all there. Your callings, your passions, your purposes that God has given you, that's not what's being asked to be submitted. What submission is asking for is the route that you decide to take to get there. God wants the directions, not the destination. He wants to help get you there, but you have to follow His directions to do so. Because we can't give up the destination. When we get in this mindset of, well, that doesn't really matter anyways, I didn't want it. When we say that, we typically say that like, I don't care, I didn't care anyways. We cared. It's okay to care. When we say when we deny that, that's self-hatred. We're purposefully hurting ourselves. That's not submission. Submission is not saying or thinking that I'm less than, that I'm worthless. No. That's self-contempt. That's not submission. It's not what I struggle with. Confession time too. I struggle with this idea of what I call the Cinderella complex, which is I'm giving up all of these things that I desire for the sake of someone else, but I always get overlooked. I'm never, clean and never get invited to the ball. And then I have a pity party. Self-pity is not submission either. All of these things will kill everything that we're trying to do. Everything, it kills that freedom that submission is trying to create in our lives. So what is submission? What does that look like? Jesus defined it as this. He says, he who wants to be my disciple, whoever wants to be my disciple, must deny themselves, pick up their cross, and follow me. Whoever tries to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Submission is self-denial. The Apostle Paul illustrates this best when we get into Ephesians. He describes the idea that self-denial is trying to get across. It says that, however, each of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Children, obey your parents and the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on earth. It's also a threat. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with the sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eyes is on you, but as slaves of Christ. doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Historically, the crowd that Paul's talking to, there's two crowds that he's just addressed with that long list. Now, the first one was kind of the duh crowd. These were the wives, the children, and the slaves, because they're in Paul's day and age. This was their lot. They were supposed to be submissive. That was their station in life. But Paul is addressing the fact that you can submit physically, you can obey physically without submitting inwardly. And he's saying that that's submitting with just your outside. Just simple obedience is not enough. We must be able to submit and serve people that we are under the same way as if they were Jesus. To serve other people as if they were Jesus. When this conversation came up the other day, Pastor Farah made an excellent illustration or an excellent point with this. As she made the point that it's not submission until you disagree. It's not submission if you just yield your hands. You have to yield your heart as well. And that's hard. But the astounding thing was what he told the other group. Because this other group, these were the authorities. The husbands, the parents, the masters. And he looked at them and said, the same way that I just told the slaves to obey you, you're supposed to obey the slaves. You're supposed to treat them the same way. He's telling them that their authority is not for their own benefit. It is meant to be used for the benefit of those that were underneath them. Their power, their privilege, their position is not meant to fulfill their own dreams. It's meant to fulfill the dreams of those who have submitted to them. Self-denial. At its root is simple enough to do, simple enough to understand, but hard to do. Self-denial is seeing to the needs of others before your own. Seeing to the needs of others before your own. It's not ignoring your own needs. It's not being told to give up the hopes and the dreams that you have in your heart, because God put those there. But it's also encouraging us to look at that in another person. Two things, and then we'll pray. This is done in two ways. The first thing is to seek to understand before you are understood. If you have problems with authority, this is a key thing, because stopping to understand why your parents are mad at you or why they're stressed out. They're stressed out because things at work may be complicated. Your boss at work may be fussing at you because their home life is frustrated and you showed up late. It's not providing an excuse. They may abuse their power. They may handle it poorly. It doesn't excuse their action, but it explains it. And when we understand someone, it's easier to have grace towards that person. And they need that because we need that. Seek to understand people before being understood. And that doesn't mean that we just clam up and never express ourselves. Again, try and understand, but also be honest with people about what you're looking for in life. Be honest about what your heart desires. Second is this: serve people, serve others before you are served. Look for the opportunity to serve someone else before you are served. There's big examples of this, and there's everyday examples of this. Being willing to do your chores is a small example of serving before being served by the elf. If you take the opportunity to help set the table, you're serving other people. You're looking to what they need before you need. It doesn't have to, these things they don't have to be big. Submission is not a big discipline. It is an inch by inch discipline. We have to work at it in the little places before we really get down to handling it on the big places. Discipline equals freedom. Submission allows God to take us from where we are to where we're wanting to go. Submitting to that authority is part of how we do this, okay? Seeing to the needs of others before our own is what it means to deny ourselves. I want everybody to close their eyes and bow their head for a second. Like I mentioned, this is a difficult discipline for me. Everything that I've just discussed, I've gotten to deal with within the past 6 months, some of it within the past 36 hours. And it's hard sometimes to find that line, to be healthy in our submission, to have healthy relationships with authority. But it goes back to, I have to remember, it goes back to that deal that just because my expectations of how it was supposed to play out get interrupted does not mean that God will not give me what I'm looking for. He'll see to what I need. He will give me what He's promised if I will be submissive enough to let Him do that. So what is it that you need to submit to? Who is it that you need to try and understand? Who is it that you need to try and serve? Think about that this week. Look for that person.